Hey everybody, how are you today? So, it's gonna be June 19th. I am pre-recording this video just because I do like to celebrate my husband every year on June 19th, which was the day he passed away. June is kind of a tough month for me, but I'm very proud of myself this year. I didn't even think about the day that our baby was kidnapped, which was yesterday. Every year on June 10th, I usually get pretty depressed. But I guess because I'm in such a happy place now, it really doesn't affect me as much as it used to. I think that when you are alone and, just isolated in a place with nobody around to talk to, things just kind of, fester in your mind. And you just kind of wallow in all of the disappointment and despair that you've had in the past. So I'm proud of myself. It's taken me a very long time to get here. It's been almost 25 years. It was 1999 that she was taken, and I'm doing better, thank God. I will always have her pictures. I don't care what anybody says. Her birth mother was entitled to her. It was just the way she did it was just so cruel, you know. You don't take a baby on a day trip and then just decide not to give her back, and that's what happened. Um, you know, we had plans that weekend, and, and the hard thing was that the night before I had gotten home from work and the baby was asleep. And so I thought, oh, no problem, we can play tomorrow. And then the next day was the day they took her for a day trip and never brought her back. So very cruel and so insensitive to the baby. I don't think they probably didn't even care about the baby. They just cared about what they wanted. And that was that. So, I was in years of therapy over it, and then of course I discovered Keith Urban, and then I got better. And then, oh lordy, today's what, the 11th? Tomorrow's the concert I was going to go to, but that didn't work out. So that was kind of be, a celebration of everything. I like to do something fun in June just to, keep the sadness away. So, oh well, what can you do? But yeah, but I'm doing much better. When you lose someone, it's really hard. Now with me, there was so much anger and resentment because of the lack of good health care in East Tennessee. Um, the health care in Sevierville and Pigeon Forge area was, oh my gosh, terrible. And a lot of it was because Dave had been on morphine for over 5 years for his severely injured back. And because there was such a, what word can I say? Was such a epidemic of opiate use in East Tennessee that every single doctor he went to would not give him the medication that he had been on for 5 years. He was forced to go cold turkey off of morphine, and it was terrible for him. He was a mess when we moved to East Tennessee. We fell in love with Tennessee because we'd been there several times, and we just loved it. We started out in the Nashville area, and then after 10 years, we moved to Sevierville, Pigeon Forge area. And so, it was kind of a mistake in one way because it was just the demise of my poor husband, And he finally found a doctor that would give him the morphine. But it took years, It took we were there for what? We were there for 4 years, and he didn't find a decent doctor until like a year before he passed away to give him the morphine. So he spent all that time, you know, in agony, and he was always in pain with his back. And then we never could get an MRI of his back because he couldn't stay on the table for very long. But once he passed away, I had gotten all of his medical records, which I have since gotten rid of. You know, I kept them for years and years, and then I figured, you know, it's just time to let go. But he had pretty bad damage in his back because he had fallen at work. He was working at Tucson Studios when we lived in Tucson, Arizona in 1980s. And he had fallen onto the railroad tracks. And he had gone to, you know, the doctor place where you need to go when you're hurt or whatever. And he made the mistake of telling the doctor that a scorpion bit him. So the doctor assumed that it was just a scorpion thing, and it had nothing to do with the fall that he took. So that poor man just suffered for years, you know. So, yeah, I found out, man, his back was messed up. There was a reason that he was in so much pain, you know. And I can't imagine, because I have the chronic pain too, not as bad as him, I'm sure. But, you know, just with the you know, little pain compared to his pain, but it's still, you know, it can be debilitating at times. But I just can't imagine being like that 24/7 and being forced to go off of the medicine that you were on for so many years. Just can't imagine it. And he was miserable. And I really think that by the time he wound up in the hospital, he was just ready to go, you know. He had told me several times, he said, I'm just ready to go. I said, I'm tired of feeling like this all the time, and I don't blame him, you know. But yeah, it's just taken a long time because I was so angry at the doctor. I'd taken him to his doctor last week of May. I was convinced he had pneumonia, and the doctor wouldn't even listen to his lungs. So after that, I took him into the ER because he was so sick. He was throwing up, he had a fever, and the ER doctor told him he had the flu and told him to go home, right? A week later, he's back in the ER with 70% saturation oxygen rate, which is very, very bad, very serious. So they had to intubate him. And he was intubated for like 45 days. And then once they took him off the medication to keep him asleep, he didn't wake up. So, yeah. So from the time we went to the hospital, and then 45 days later, he finally woke up and he was able to talk. So, you know, and the rehab place that I was at, which really was a nursing home, I was really lied to about where he was going. They told me, we're going to get him over to rehab and, you know, he'll recover and he'll be fine. And that was a lie. You know, I think they just sent him there to die, basically. So, but when he woke up, he was doing great. He was talking. And then one day I went back to see him. I had worked at Dollywood that day, 12-hour day. And I went to go see him that night, and his hands were shaking. And I have a lot of medical knowledge, okay, because I've been a medical secretary, transcriptionist my entire career, all right? My medical background is very, very good. So I knew, I said, there's something wrong with him. I'm thinking he's had a stroke or something. And the nurses just poo-pooed me. Like, oh, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. And then when the day nurses came in the next day, they were like, they woke me up. I was sleeping out in the lobby. And they said, we think something's wrong. You know, he won't respond to us. And I told them, I said, yeah, I told them last night. and they totally ignored me. And so by the time the day nurses came in, it was too late. He had had a major brain bleed. All right. Sent him over to the local hospital. And then from there, they sent him over to the big hospital, UT. Where was I? I was in Tennessee, right? Yeah, University of Tennessee. And he was over there for 7 days, still intubated, still, on the machines and everything. And then I think it was like on the 6th or 7th day, this teaching doctor comes in with a bunch of students, like 5 or 6 students, and he just outright, bluntly told me, he's not breathing on his own. We're taking him off the machine today. Yeah. I was so angry. I mean, talk about lousy bedside manner, right? One of his students tried to console me, and I was just so mad. I said, don't worry about it, I'm fine. I was so mad. So they took him off. He tried to breathe for about 15 minutes, and he couldn't. So I was so mad at all the doctors that had let him down and made that poor man suffer for as long as he did. And I felt guilty because he was on a medication to keep his liver flushed out, okay? But he wasn't good about taking it. And the last week, I hadn't gotten the medication. And I think it was because in my mind, the man's not taking it anyway, I don't remember why. I think we ran out of it. And I hadn't gotten to the pharmacy. I mean, it wasn't something really deliberate that I did. It was just, I knew his history of him. He hates to take medication. So I felt guilty for a very long time about that. That, maybe if he had his liver medication, it would have worked. But in the end, it really wasn't that. He had very bad teeth, and he was actively popping the pus pockets in his infected teeth and gums. And because of that, he went into sepsis. Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. When you have a tooth infection, you really, really need to go to the dentist, because if you don't and that infection stays in there, all that poison gets into your body. And then you're in trouble, and that's what happened to him, basically. He still had pneumonia. He did have the pneumonia, which I knew he did. They discovered that. And then he had the sepsis, and all his organs were trying to shut down. It was just a mess. And so that's why I have been angry for so many years, because that didn't have to happen. If he had had decent medical care, none of that would have happened. As far as the teeth, I really couldn't keep him from that. He was a very strong man. He did what he wanted to do. He didn't really listen to anybody. So, who knows? Maybe he did it deliberately. I don't know. But anyway, so that was the trauma I went through with Dave and all the frickin' doctors in Sevierville, and we didn't have the means, really, to go to doctors in Knoxville, because Knoxville was pretty far away from us. 30-40 minutes, and our car just wasn't doing well, so we couldn't afford to take him to Knoxville. I'm sure he would have gotten better care in Knoxville. But, small town Sevierville, there's so many doctors that just poo-pooed him and said, no, we can't give you medication. He suffered because of the pandemic. I can't remember the word. I'm losing my mind, guys. There was just such a high... Oh, my God. High use of opiates in the area. I'm losing words. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So just because of that, he was punished. Nope, we can't give it to you. Nope, we can't give it to you. Never mind that he was on it for 5 years. Doctor prescribed, right? So hold on. So that was that. And it just took me a really long time, probably up until I want to say a year or so ago. I mean, the anger's still there, but it's not as intense as it had been for so many years. And the resentment against him, because even though I knew he was sick, he was very belligerent. He had some sort of dementia, but it might have been the poison in his body because he wasn't really diagnosed with anything in the brain causing dementia or Alzheimer's when he had all the tests in the hospital. But, he had typical symptoms, though. He was putting tools in the refrigerator. All of a sudden, he couldn't use the TV remote anymore. He didn't know how to use it. And he was getting combative with me, and it was getting scary. One day, he got mad at me and said, "I'm going to belt you." And Dave would never do that. He never believed in hitting women. So I had gotten to the point where, damn, I wonder if need to put him in a nursing home or something. And then this all happened with the pneumonia and the sepsis and I hate to say it, but it was as hard as it was for him. It might have been just a blessing in disguise, because I don't think our lives would be ever the same again if, I had to put him in a nursing home or something like that. But, yeah, he died because of negligence at this rehab center in Maryville, Tennessee. And so that's the story of Dave. We were together from 1982 up until 2013. So that's a long time that we were together. And you've all seen my videos about the story of my life and all that. So that's that. And I just think of him and Elizabeth on this day because they were inseparable, absolutely inseparable. So anyhow, just letting you know, when you lose somebody, it is so hard, especially your husband or wife. And it gets better. It may take 10, 11 years. It may never leave you, the deep grief, I'm finally starting to remember the good times, This is how long it's taken me, 12 years. So, hang in there. It's going to be a rough ride. And one other thing was that, he had passed away in June. And then my mom had sent me some money, for rent and things like that. And I got a ticket to go see Keith Urban in Charlotte, North Carolina. And those were the good days when you could, rent a car, and they brought it to your house and all that. So in July, I went to go see Keith Urban. Keith Urban has always been my savior, as far as grief and depression and all that. So I owe my life to that man. He just really affected me so deeply and brought me so much joy. So anyhow, I hope everybody's well, and hang in there. Love you, bye.